Okay, Mark, how you doing?
Great. How are you?
Great. Okay, so what we're going to talk about is a newer concept at Replicated that we're kind of talking about as the commercial software distribution lifecycle. So I know it's a lot of words, but generally, this is the idea that we think we want to frame Replicated around. So we'll go ahead and kind of talk a bit about it. So the commercial software distribution lifecycle is the process that independent software vendors go through to distribute self-hosted enterprise software. So we think about this as something that should sort of feel familiar to you. One, because we think that you and your teams are actually the ones going through this process. And two, it should be kind of reminiscent of the DevOps lifecycle, right? There are some similar phases, but there are unique pieces for distributing enterprise self-hosted software that we want to really capture and focus in on with this distribution lifecycle. So how do we develop it? We've talked to thousands of vendors over the last 9 years, and a lot of these ideas have come from those conversations around understanding what the best software vendors are doing, even those folks that aren't customers, and those that are. And again, we think that this is the problem that you're working with us to help solve. Also, many of these areas are not places that we really had value in, maybe when you bought, but they are areas in that we are investing more and more in to expand the value that we're creating for you. So, I think realistically, we didn't do much in test and in report, and we didn't have a whole lot in, even our releasing has changed dramatically, and our development is, that's changed a lot. So there's a lot of new functionality here and new focus.
I think the thing that we'll spend a minute talking about too is like when you ship to one customer, like you have to go through this process, but it's like a little bit less mature. And as you expand to more and more customers, you really do end up like this becomes a little bit more evident as this is a workflow and a process that you're going through as you get to more customers.
It's a great point. So as you really kind of, as I always say, operationalize the distribution of your software. Cool. So we'll hop on and we're going to talk about each section as the life cycle, and then we'll talk about how Replicated thinks about these. But first, we're going to talk about each section, each stage. So the develop stage, this is where you're really trying to create a truly portable application with swappable dependencies, right? So swappable mean like, hey, let your customer bring their own Postgres. Portable, we mean like, not using cloud-specific services. You want something that can really run anywhere. When you're developing your application, you're going to focus on reliability and resilience. And then generally, we expect you to be using common packaging and templating patterns. So this is where Helm and some other tooling would come in. Marc, anything to add here on this stage?
Yeah, it's that portability and swappable dependencies, I think, is worth talking about for just a second. Like when you ship to the first customer, you kind of understand how they're going to run your software. And as you ship again to more and more customers, there's various requirements that end customers have around how to run stateful components, what can be in cluster, what has out of cluster, what cloud resources are available to them. And, thinking about making sure that your distribution can form into that enterprise environment is really kind of a key part of it. And it's both the dependencies and it's like their availability requirements that they're going to have for the application.
Yeah, I think it's a great point. And I think those templating patterns also matter because, there are things that you're going to need to template for your application to make sure your customers can change, because they often do.
Yeah, they're going to extend it to support the way that they actually operationalize the software inside their environment. The most sophisticated end customers, we talked a little bit about Helm earlier today. Folks just don't want a Helm chart. They want a Helm chart that they can adopt into their process to deploy software. And that generally means that they're going to, use tools that they already have to operationalize it. And like, it has to be configurable.
Yeah, and I think worth pointing out here at this stage as well, and it's true for every stage, we really like to think about what's unique about distributed software. Obviously you're developing your application, you're doing your core kind of application development and packaging, but this is really what's unique about distributing this to customers. I think the DevOps lifecycle is really focused on what we think about as like first-party software distribution, right? You're distributing to environments that you can control. And so a lot of these stages just aren't as relevant. And then the ones that are relevant to both, there are really unique focuses that are specific for self-hosted software. So as we get in the next phase, the test phase. So this is what's really unique about testing for distributed software is the requirement that you need to test this on a variety of different environments, because your customers are going to have different versions of Kubernetes, different components, different configurations. And so you have to think about this kind of comprehensive matrix to test against that. I think this is, we'll talk more about our solution here, but Marc, anything else you want to add about this stage?
Yeah, I mean, it's interesting because there's every time that we start to think about this a little bit more and more, we realize there's just another layer to this matrix of testing. It's Kubernetes distributions, it's cloud providers. Once you have Kubernetes, maybe you have a 5 customers running Kubernetes 128. There might be 2 or 3 different CNIs, CSIs, that are actually running inside that environment. They're using different ingress options. It is unlikely, that you're going to end up with 2 customers that literally match that completely. So testing is challenging because it can cause, we all know that testing is really important, but even testing the differences between 2 different ingress controllers and how they work, we find things like, oh, well, gRPC doesn't work on this ingress controller as well as it does on that one. And it's not a fault of the ingress controller. It's just really being aware of how your application is going to perform and not really having to test it in the customer environment on the day of install.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. So then the release stage, right? This is where you're publishing artifacts and versions. You're going to manage a registry or a directory where you host those. You're going to control the cadence at which you distribute your application and those artifacts to different customers, right? Because some customers might want to receive these updates daily, weekly, monthly, quarterly, and you need to have kind of cadence controls. And then also, you don't necessarily want to release to every customer at the same time. You'll be notifying customers of releases and then doing waterlining, which is basically like, hey, we don't support anything below this. You need to upgrade here, patching, for maintaining multiple different versions and then patch versions on top of that. And so, I think that this release, kind of advanced release management is actually, far more complex for distributed software than it is when you're just pushing a commit into Git and then kind of letting that, deploy out automatically.
Yeah, when you're pushing releases into Git and deploying it to a SaaS product, you generally have a pretty linear process. Every commit lands in your production environment. And then when customers get out of date and they get a little bit older, and then they want to skip a bunch of versions, you actually, how do you think about database migrations if there's required releases and skippable releases, and just the whole process here around, you will have some customers that will receive every commit, every push that you actually have, and you'll have some that might take, periods of the year where they just they're in a freeze, they don't want to receive any updates, or they're just on a less frequent cadence, and being able to support that and make sure that they're hitting required releases that that run migrations or anything like that, that's important.
Yeah, exactly. Cool. Then the license stage. So you need to sort of make your application available, but you don't want it to be broadly available, so you control who has access. And so think about this as fine-grained access control to versions, images, etc. But it's also oftentimes the delivery of entitlements. And by that we mean expiration date, seat count, etc. Just ways that you might have different variation of customer setups and customer what they're allowed to use or how they're expected to use something. And then you also want to be able to validate and sign those entitlement values. So we think that's a really important part of general license management and in creating good licenses for the installation of software.
Yeah, the only thing I'd add into here is, it kind of gets a little bit into the next phase, but licensing has to work for servers that are connected to the internet that can, you could provide a key and then look up values, but also air-gapped installations where you have to, you want some assurances, you want that to be, relatively tamper-proof that you're sending into that customer environment.
Yeah. Yeah, that to the next one for install, we think about this as meeting the full spectrum of customer needs, right? So you need to have installation options. And this means today we see different platforms. So it could be Kubernetes, could be VMware, could be something else. As Marc just mentioned, network access really comes into play here. Air gap proxy installs online, and then different controls and requirements, right? So this could be things around CVEs, or we talked earlier about NISTs, STIGs, ISO, and sort of making sure that you have solutions that at least take those into consideration. And then enabling customers to update and operate. So this is, I think this like install, maybe it should be install/operate, because that really is an important part of this. It's not just a day one, it's also like day 2 and beyond. And your methodology needs to really be considerate of that.
Yeah, I mean, I think that this is like super important. Anything that when you're packaging the application for installation and operation, you want to basically meet the customer where they are, or as close as you can, because the farther away you are, the more friction it introduces into that process. If they're, that's why we actually, are putting so much effort into this embedded cluster product that Alex is showing, because there are, and also Helm. It's like some customers want Helm, they can operationalize that really well, and some, maybe they have the technical capabilities, but they just don't want to manage another Kubernetes cluster in order to like deploy your application. So, really thinking about meeting them where they are, it's really more of a spectrum than those two. But like, again, it's, thinking about the network, thinking about their entire environment.
Yeah. Then there's report. So I think with any good software, we talked to Ramon earlier, Guardian, about this, but like you need insights into how your customers are actually using your software. You want to know, usage. You want to have kind of just general, like, is their application up and running? What's happening with this? And so you need some amount of telemetry visibility into those environments. And so reporting some amount back is super important.
Yeah, I don't exactly. I mean, there's not much more to add to that. Like being able to see how the application's running is, something that you generally can do when you're running multi-tenant SaaS, but like it's really hard to do when you're shipping it into their environment.
Yeah, and then finally there's support, right? And so this is, you have to, I think that the supportability of when another team is actually operating your application, you have to think about extending that operations level support beyond your team that are the experts in it into a team that is unfamiliar with your technologies and is using a platform to operate it. So you'll need to be able to handle escalations, troubleshoot their environment by collecting logs, redacting those, and analyzing those. This is where disaster recovery really comes becomes important, and you have to kind of like pre-configure and predetermine what that strategy is, or else it's too late when it happens. And then really finding a way to get faster mean time to resolution.
Yeah, exactly. You have to expect that it's going to, like, all software has problems. Depending, it's not necessarily a bug in the software, but you're deploying it into customer environments and thinking about how to troubleshoot that in a disconnected environment where sometimes you can't even access logs. It's just important.
Yeah, and so this is how we're thinking about the problem today. And there are areas here just generally within the commercial software distribution lifecycle that are, maybe support's an example of like, there's actually support kind of throughout that install phase. And, it's a little bit more on the release and install phase. So maybe it's an overlap, but we think that this kind of captures, all of the different stages of distributing software. And then kind of that, like, it is a lifecycle in the sense that once you're getting that reporting back and you're doing support, you're talking to customers, you build that back into your development phase. You test it, you release it, you license it, and it is a life cycle in the fact that it's kind of continuous. Cool. And then ultimately, what we see this life cycle is helping us to frame what we're trying to do at Replicated. So there's the commercial software distribution life cycle, but we think about ourselves as the commercial software distribution platform. So we plan to continue to address the various challenges at each of these stages. And so that what that means is that we will continue to provide purpose-built solutions, right? Purpose-built for third-party commercial software distribution to address the challenges within each stage. And then, I really think about Replicated and our mission and our vision here is to be an incredible partner so that you can tackle self-hosted software delivery and make it a core or strategic part of your business, right? We think you should be able to build on our solutions and make this a solved problem. Doesn't necessarily mean it's going to be an easy problem, right? But it should be a solved problem. And that's really where, you might have to integrate and test it and release it and do all the things we're talking about. But we hope that if we build the platform correctly and you leverage all the different tools that we have, that this will be a real strength and a real enabler for your business to sell to large enterprises and allow them to run and successfully, deploy and leverage your software so that your team can focus on building your application and getting your customers successful while we make sure that your application is successfully delivered, deployed, and operating. So we'll kind of go through how we think about each section from a replicated platform perspective. So when it comes to the develop stage, we have this SDK that we mentioned, the folks at GitGuardian are using. This enables functionality through lots of different phases, test, license, report, support. And additionally, we're thinking about both like the work that we do to help assist you in packaging and integrating your application. And we're looking at building more tooling to streamline that even further.
Yeah, I mean, I definitely look at develop as like the key part of it, right? It's develop and package, to your point. Like it's even, as we talked earlier about the swappable components in the config page that Replicated has, where we can actually give radio buttons and checkboxes for bring your own database or like run it in the cluster as one example. But leveraging Helm a lot for that these days, but really making sure that your application is configurable through the packaging mechanism.
And then if we go on to test, right? So this is where, we didn't have any solutions in this category a year ago. And now we have the compatibility matrix, which is, quickly becoming one of our most popular products. So if you haven't used it, it's incredibly powerful. Interestingly, some of the compatibility matrix, the ability to spin up, all these different clusters, is also being used by some customers in the develop stage and other customers in the support stage. And so there are ways to kind of, use this infrastructure that we're providing, better, faster, and cheaper, and giving you access to all these different distributions of Kubernetes, all the different versions, configurations, and use that throughout this life cycle. But specifically, we kind of initially built it with the idea that you would integrate the compatibility matrix into your CI, use our CLI, use our GitHub Actions, spin up a handful of clusters during commit, run through some tests, validate that the application works as expected before you actually proceed and ship this to customers. And then it integrates with our SDK, to collect some metadata about those customer representative environments and send that back up. So that way you can say, hey, give me, clusters that look like these other licenses.
Yeah, if you don't have any customers running OpenShift 4.15, you don't really necessarily need to test on OpenShift 4.15. But like integrating into that SDK and like the rest of the lifecycle is a key part of this, because if you have a customer running a version of OpenShift or AKS, and then that customer upgrades to a newer version of Kubernetes, you're reporting, we'll get to that later, but like the SDK is reporting that back to Replicated and to you, showing that customer is now running Kubernetes 129. So the next CI run you have would be great. That's what we actually can do, is just feed that into the matrix for the CI run, and really make sure that we're delivering those customer representative environments reliably and quickly. Our goal is around 3 minutes or so to create these clusters. But we've also done some stuff around adding verification steps to it. So we run conformance tests on the cluster before we give it to you, because flaky CI is terrible. Nobody wants to deal with that. It's really a key part of making sure that you can test this application and get higher confidence before shipping into customer environments.
The release stage, right? So this is where we offer release channels, our Helm registry, private container delivery, and air-gap packaging, the download portal. There's a lot really here in release. And it kind of ties into the other areas of license, instance, and install. But we really think about release as kind of always been a core part of the Replicated product.
Yeah, and that includes things like custom domains on all of the endpoints that it talks to for online installations, so that it really does feel like it's your application. I mean, it is your application. So you're just, we are a component of the application, but it's not a replicated app that's powering it. It's just a component, and like from the registry to the container images, everything.
Yeah, that's a great point. The license stage, right? So this is where we provide that licensing server. We recently introduced advanced container image role-based access control, so you can specify which customers get which container images. We have custom entitlements, right? So this is that like custom license fields idea where you can pass down, hey, this is how many seats or something else that you want to show. We do sign all those values, and then you can validate that with the SDK in the customer environment. And then finally, we recently added this idea of adding a custom ID, right? Which could be a Salesforce ID, or as Chuck referenced, an AWS customer ID. But the idea is to integrate with systems of record and be able to query and kind of like update records in Replicated based off of actions in other platforms.
Yeah, I don't really have much to add here. I think this is a core part of what we've done from the beginning at Replicated, and it became, hey, we deliver licenses that have expirations and custom entitlements. But Grant mentioned two things here: advanced container image RBAC and the integrating with other systems of record. So we're starting to really add new functionality into the licensing system, which is pretty exciting. It kind of helps build out the entire life cycle.
Great. Then we have the install stage, right? So this is where we offer our install options, right? So the embedded cluster delivery. This is where curl would live. This is where Koch would live. But primarily it's around embedded cluster now, the OCI registry for Helm, right? So this is for existing workflows and existing clusters. Then we have pre-flight checks to validate customer environments, right? So this is, I think, that little step to validate that before you do an installation, the customer's environment will meet your requirements. I think is a really important piece to reduce support issues.
Yeah, and the one thing that's not on here, we talk about embedded cluster and OCI for Helm, but obviously there's COTS install too, which most people here probably know about. But it's the UI based installing to existing clusters continues to be supported if you package as Kubernetes manifest or Helm.
Yeah. Report stage, right? This is we're providing you insights into the uptime of every instance that is reporting back. We're giving you metadata about the environments, what version they're running, what environment that it's in. You can send back that custom telemetry, those product usage data. And then we do have notifications, that you can hook up into Slack or email for your CSMs, TAMs, anyone that's a little more customer facing.
Yeah, and like we mentioned before, when we were talking about tests, this data can be used to feed into compatibility matrix. So you can, use this data to know what those customer representative environments are. So you're not testing on everything; you're testing on ones that matter.
Right, and export it as well. I think it's another key part of this, where you can export it in your own systems. And then finally, support, right? So I think the most important part of our support is really not even the product. The support bundle framework with troubleshoot is really important. But our team of 24/7 kind of Kubernetes experts who are available for your escalation. So when you have tier 2 and 3 escalations that you need attention from our team, we're available. And I think that's maybe one of the most valuable things that Replicated provides is backing your team up to make sure that your customers are really successful with their deployments. And then finally, we have the integrated snapshot and restore. It's an important part of what Replicated's done to make sure that when your customers are deploying, they're always successful if there is a need for disaster recovery.
Yeah, and one of the things that we've added, relatively recently, is a little tool called SB-Cuddle. So you have a support bundle, which is an archive of everything that we collect from the cluster that you can poke through, and it's redacted, and you can try to understand what's going on. SB-Cuddle is a way just to like spin up a Kubernetes API server and then use kubectl against that support bundle. So really the goal on that is you have your support engineers or your engineers that want to support these on-prem customers, and they're giving a support bundle. You can actually allow them to interact, your team to use tooling that they're familiar with and comfortable with to help debug those issues.
Completely. Great. So what's next, right? How do we think about this guiding what we're doing? Ultimately, at Replicated, we want to continue to solve problems that exist within this life cycle, right? So your full kind of like from development to support, that whole life cycle, we want to be, a key partner for our customers and prospects to to basically enable you to deliver world-class enterprise software. I do think it's time for you to think about Replicated as the platform and the way that you're going to be very successful tackling this problem. So hopefully this resonates with you. If you have feedback, I'm always interested to talk about it. We've developed this by talking to customers. We've had really good feedback that's helped us along the way, and more we'd love to include as well.